During this lab, we are going to perform a distillation. Pages 1 and 2 of the lab involve separating a mixture of two liquids based on their boiling points. A distillation is simply a separation technique that allows you to separate a mixture of liquids. Can you remember the lab technique that allows you to separate a solid from a liquid? That would be filtration. We will then test the distillate or the liquid that was separated to determine its identity. The second purpose of this lab is to determine the identity of 4 unknowns using iodine, cobalt chloride, and copper sulfate. Using that information, we will be able to determine what the identity of the distillate from purpose 1 is. Here's a picture of the distillation apparatus we will be using. The flask contains a solution of 2 liquids. We will separate those liquids based on their boiling point. The liquid that boils at a lower temperature will turn into a vapor first. We will measure the temperature of that vapor with a thermometer. The vapor will go through the glass tube into this plastic tube where it will condense back into a liquid. We will collect that condensed liquid, that is the distillate, in this graduated cylinder in this ice bath. Let's go ahead and start the lab by drying off a 25 milliliter graduated cylinder and getting the mass of that empty graduated cylinder. Make sure to record the mass of this empty cylinder in the data table on page 2 of the lab. Now I'm going to add boiling chips to the solution in the flask. These boiling chips help prevent superheating and provide nucleation sites, or places where bubbles can form when the solution boils. The apparatus is now set up and we are ready to begin our distillation. We will now do some tests on the distillate to help us determine the identity of the distillate. First, we will add a crystal of iodine to a sample of the distillate, finger tap, and then make observations. Record these observations in the data table on page 2. Now we will add a small amount of cobalt chloride to the distillate, finger tap, and make observations. Once again, record these observations in the data table on page 2. The final test we will do on the distillate is a test with copper sulfate. Finger tap, make observations, and record these observations in the data table on page 2. We will now do these same 3 tests on 4 different unknowns and try to determine the identity of the unknowns by comparing our observed results to the actual results given to you on page 4 of the lab. We will start by doing the copper sulfate test on all 4 unknowns. Finger tap all 4 test tubes, make observations, and record these observations in the data table on page 4. Next, we will test the unknowns with cobalt chloride. Finger tap, make observations, and record these observations in the data table on page 4. Now we will add an iodine crystal to each of the 4 unknowns, finger tap, make observations, and record these observations in the data table on page 4. That completes the data collection portion of the lab. Please complete the data table on page 2 by determining the mass of the distillate. Then determine the identity of the unknowns by comparing your observations from the tests completed to the actual results for the possible unknown substances. Finally, determine the density of the distillate using the mass of the distillate and the volume of the distillate from the data table on page 2. From there, you should have enough information to determine the identity of the distillate. When you have all of that done, you can turn in the lab.